Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sleeping Time Podcast. Today it is the third episode of the Sleeping Time Cast. Today's topic is going to be nostalgia. So the definition of nostalgia is a sentimental longing for wistful affection, for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. So for me, a nostalgia that I've had, like a kind of a reoccurring nostalgia for me, is as weird as it sounds. There's a soap that I used to uh, when I was in preschool. There was this soap, and if you've ever seen the unicorn's blood in the Harry Potter movie, it was that. It was just like that, but it was hot pink. It was like a neon pink. For any of those who haven't seen the Harry Potter movie, basically just imagine maple syrup and molten metal. Like it looks like molten metal, just like this weird like silvery gunky thing going on, but it's like the consistency and the thickness and feel of syrup, and it's hot pink and it smells like strawberries. And I'll go to like public bathrooms all the time, and like every once in a while I'll smell it again. I'll just be like, oh, whoa, and I'll think of preschool, but everyone will look at me weird because I'm like sniffing the bathroom or like sniffing my hands in the bathroom, and I look like an idiot. Honestly, I look like a weirdo, but it's just something really nostalgic for me. Same with PB&J sandwiches, mac and cheese. I get hella nostalgic for that stuff. Uh, like, um, I know a buddy of mine. He's nostalgic for his old house. Like his parents got divorced, and so they sold the house, and they got two different places. And even though there was some rough stuff going on at that house, he still remembers it as like a good place for him, because even though like he would hear like a lot of yelling and stuff like that, nothing violent or anything like that, but just a lot of yelling. Even though he has such a strong connection, because that's where he grew up, and so kind of like thinking about his parents makes him think about like the divorce, but then it also makes him think about happy memories and times he had with his parents. And so I'm just gonna kind of go through some facts that I know, facts that I looked up, just basically information about nostalgia. So, of course, nostalgia can improve mood. Like, although nostalgia is often triggered by like negative feelings, it's a result. It usually results in increasing one's mood and heightening positive emotions, which stern stem from feelings of warmth or coping resulting from nostalgic reactions. One way to improve mood is to effectively cope with problems that hinders one's happiness. Basically, really all that means is in stressful situations, people will use nostalgia as a coping mechanism. Like they'll cope by being like, oh, like I'm studying for AP finals. Oh, I remember when I used to study for like for like old English tests, and then oh, middle school. Oh my God, I remember middle school. Oh my God, I remember elementary school, and I remember taking like a 2+2 test, and oh, now I feel all warm and fuzzy again. And a lot of people use that, and so even though it comes on from like a negative feeling of stress, it creates a positive reaction and increases your mood. It also increases social connectedness. Like nostalgia, usually involves memories or people that you're close to, and so it like increases your your social like support and connections. By which I mean like if I am like, oh, I'm nostalgic for mac and cheese, and someone's like, oh my God, me too, I love mac and cheese. That's a connection, and that can spurn a lot of like friendships. I know a lot of friendships for me are kind of came from common wants and likes, and also nostalgias. Like a lot of my friends are in do a lot of sports, and I remember playing sports when I was a kid, and so we connected over that. A lot of times, if you think of someone like, oh, I remember in middle school this one friend of mine. Oh, now I'm nostalgic for them. You know what? I actually still have their phone number. I'll call them up, and then you start hanging out again. I know like lonelier people have like less like perceptions and like have less social support. But like loneliness kind of like leads to nostalgia because you're trying to think back of a happier time, which then increases it. And so basically, people who are lonely or have depression, a lot of times, kind of a mechanism that they use to get out or to get better is by nostalgia. I'm gonna sip some tea real quick. Oh, I'm drinking a wild raspberry hibiscus herbal tea by Stash Premium Tea. I don't. I'm not a premium fellow, so I feel very precious when I drink that kind of tea. Anyways, it can also enhance positive like self-regard. Like nostalgia serves like as a coping mechanism, as you know, or as I've told you, whatever, whichever one came first. But uh, people have found that people who think of nostalgic memories show a greater like accessibility of positive characteristics than those that think of like exciting future experiences. So people who think of the future more are less kind of like positive, have less positive characteristics than people that look back on the past. Um, and whether that be positive or negative, it usually has the same effect. Like the researchers looked at like self attributes and found that like participants who were not exposed to nostalgic events reflected a pattern of selfish and self-centered attributes. However, the same researchers found that this effect had weakened, excuse me, and become less powerful among the participants who engaged in nostalgic reflection. So, really, all it really means is when you're nostalgic, you just become more positive. Like you kind of find actually another fact, you kind of find a more meaning in life. Nostalgia helps increase one's self-esteem and meaning of life by buffering threats to well-being and also by initiating a desire to deal with problems or stress. Um, a lot of people have, or at least for me, a lot of people in my life that have had being in like being a student and everything like with depression and stuff like that. Like a lot of times they'll think back of to positive times and they'll just feel better. Like I know that depression is a terrible thing to deal with and you can't just think happy. Like that's not how it works at all, but it does help to think of happy thoughts or happy experiences. It won't cure it, not by a long shot. I mean, you need an actual doctor for that, and even a psychiatrist too if you have a more serious case. But by triggering nostalgia, one's defensiveness is to such like a threat of like, oh, I'm meaningless, I'm worthless. It really just increases your meaning in life. It creates like a I'm more important than I thought kind of a thing, and it minimalizes that threat. I know there was the two studies that found that nostalgia is able not only to create meaning, but kind of like break the connections between a lack of meaning and one's well-being. So really, nostalgia is kind of like people say like laughter is the best kind of medicine. Honestly, nostalgia probably is. It really just promotes like psychological growth, and like helps you kind of find your way through life. Like engaging in kind of like growth oriented behaviors. Like for me, when I was in English class, we would have to do a writing prompt every week for a 1 page essay every week, and that would be like our Friday or Monday, depending on whatever time it was, and we have to write of a past experience. And I remember on those days, I would always feel a lot better. I would just feel happier. I would just feel just great. Um, uh, but a lot of times, as kind of crappy as this sounds, nostalgia can also be used as like a deception tool. One recent study critiques the idea of nostalgia, which in some forms can become a defense mechanism by which people avoid the historical facts. This study looked at the different portrayals of apartheid in South Africa. The apartheid in South Africa, basically, after the National Party gained power in South Africa, I believe it was in like the 1950s. Like the all white government basically instated basically Jim Crow laws like we have in the like we had in the U.S. And basically racially segregated everyone under the system of legislation, and basically just instated all these incredibly racist laws, and it was called apartheid. Basically, non-white South Africans, the majority of the population, basically had to live in separated areas. Like they were completely cut off, and contact between the two groups was very limited. Nobody could, like, if there was an African American, or sorry, since we're in Africa, just an African, who wanted to talk to a white man, he would probably get beaten for it. Like it was incredible, and this was happening in Africa, in a colonized part of South Africa, and it was terrible. But basically after the the study looked at apartheid, it argued that nostalgia appears in two ways: restorative nostalgia, which is a wish to return to the past, whether that be like a greater time. Like I know, kind of on the idea of racism, like the Ku Klux Klan wants to return to like a time where the white man ruled, kind of a thing, and that's technically nostalgia. Like as shitty as it is, it's technically nostalgia. And there's another kind called reflective nostalgia, which is more of a critically aware nostalgia. So it's basically remembering the past and analyzing it to learn what you can do better in the future. Basically, it's looking at past mistakes to improve the next experience. And this also, on the study on the topic of apartheid and politics, it also nostalgia can be used as a political tool. In 2014, a study conducted by Routledge, he and a team observed that more people reported having major disruptions, and people that the sorry, he and a team observed that the more people sorry, this is an incredibly weirded sentence. I don't know what I was writing. Anyways, um, basically, the more uncertainties and major disruptions that people had in their lives, the more nostalgic they were for the past, and so a lot of politicians will play off of that. Like, uh, politicians can like provoke like that social and like cultural anxiety and uncertainty that's kind of building in the community, and turn that nostalgia uh, into like this attractive and effective like political tool of like persuasion. Like kind of going still on the racial thing, like the Ku Klux Klan basically used as a political tool, basically saying like, do you remember when like we had power? Like they basically promised things that were just terrible and awful, and the effects of apartheid in South Africa and the Ku Klux Klan, they still exist. Like the Ku Klux Klan is huge still. I know that just kind of like uh, white nationalists in America, it's a huge problem. Like the Stormfront, the website has like 5,000 users a day. It's just awful how much of America still is nostalgic for like the 50s and the 40s when the white man ruled, and it's truly awful. Like, and some people want like slavery to still be a thing, and in some places human trafficking and stuff like that, slavery is still a thing. And that's because a lot of especially in apartheid, politicians basically told people like nostalgia, like they played off people's emotions, and that's what happens a lot of times in elections is people will have ads that put the opposing politician in a bad light. Like in our election that's happening, current or it just ended actually. But I saw tons of commercials like saying like such and such candidate has too many skeletons in the closet. He voted for this and says he's a independent, but really all he does is vote for the Republicans or the Democrats or the da da da, and they basically put their themselves in this high pedestal while breaking others down by like saying like this is what they did. Now if you want to have a good time, come with me, and they're playing off people's emotions. Oh, excuse me. I had to get a drink of tea. But really, I think nostalgia, even though with everything in life, really, there's always a good and a bad side. But I think nostalgia really is going with the definition a sentimental longing or wistful affection. I really think it's a positive thing for like 9 out of 10 times. I really think that it's going to be a positive thing, and I think that if you think more nostalgically and stop worrying about the future, and as hippie as this sounds, think about the present and kind of look back on the past and try and move forward with that like warm feeling, like using nostalgia as a comfort, like revealing those the past memories that like provided you in that time with comfort and like can like increase your mental health. It can make you feel better. And most people put like a bad rap on like coping mechanisms. Like whenever you hear that, it's like, oh, they're like hurting themselves or they're trying to cope, and that just brings on like a bad mentality. But coping mechanisms a lot of times can be good. Like a coping mechanism for me, whenever I get stressed, I eat mac and cheese. I mean, I'm always hungry, so it's not like stress eating or anything like that. Well, it kind of is, but I eat mac and cheese, or I go work out, and like a coping mechanism is just like going to the gym for me and eating mac and cheese. Like those are big things that I like to do whenever I get too stressed. I just like to break away, move on, and, and go do something else. And a lot of times, nostalgia kind of gives that to you without having to move. Like you don't have to do anything, just but think. And like thinking about past good memories can really have psychological effects on you. Like uh, fondly, fondly thinking of people, friends, it just increases your mood tenfold. Um, I mean, seriously. Excuse me, I'm going to drink some more. But yeah, and nostalgia a lot of times. I mean, seriously, people a lot of times associate nostalgia with this air of like, well, don't be nostalgic, just do better, do something right now that you can be proud of. But you can be proud of things in the past too. I mean, that's really what nostalgia comes from, is being happy and having good moments in the past. And like I know for me, like my math teacher was like, I was like, oh dude, I remember I had a conversation with him. Oh dude, I remember when I was in middle school and I would like ace all the math tests. And he's like, well, you're not in middle school anymore, so focus on this. And I was like, well, thinking of middle school and it makes me less stressed, and I'm gonna do better on like my math test or whatever. And really, just the message of this whole podcast with nostalgia is, no matter what people really tell you, and no matter how rough things get, whether mentally, physically, or emotionally, or socially, at all, just remember that there was happy times, there's going to be happy times. And think of all the moments of nostalgia you can have later on if you just keep pushing forward. That's really the whole message of nostalgia is the goodness that comes from living. And I think that's why nostalgia can improve people's lives and give them meaning, is because it gives you that drive to keep going and to be a better person. And with that, I'm looking at the time. That's all the time we really have for today. So thank you so much for listening. Next week, I think I haven't decided yet on the topic, but it's between the future of products. Like we haven't really decided the product, whether it's going to be like movies, VR, the internet, or if it's going to be about nature. If it's going to be about how the world is treating Mother Nature uh, as a whole. So please come by next week, or not next week, next podcast. Sorry. Um, and yeah, just hit that subscribe button. And thank you so much for listening. Have a great night, you guys.